Hello children, now we are going to discuss about the lymph. Lymph is what already I have told earlier, that it is just like the blood, and blood we are knowing it is the vascular tissue. So lymph is the blood, it is the another fluid, connective tissue that floats inside specialized vessels known as lymph vessels. And lymph, we all know, without RBC and platelets. So certainly when RBC is not there, it is never red in color, it is pale yellowish in color, and it is not going to be clotted due to absence of platelets. So we will just see the main composition of the lymph. So it is a colorless fluid containing very high concentration of WBC. WBC we are knowing, when we say WBC, it means the defensive cell that is present in our body in blood to protect, to defend from the microbes. So this fluid, this lymph, it contains very high concentration of WBC, specialized lymphocytic cells. Why lymphocytic cells? Because this is the agranulocytic WBC which makes antibodies. So certainly by taking the name of lymphocytic cell, it is very much clear that it has the defensive power. So first composition we will be saying what? It has very high concentration of WBC, specially lymphocytic cells. So the overall composition of lymph is similar to blood, only the exception of the absence of RBC, platelets and some plasma protein. And the most striking feature is what? It is having less calcium and phosphorus ion than RBC. So it contains all the ions present in the blood plasma. So this was all regarding the composition of lymph. Now we will coming down on the lymphatic system. When we say system, means it is consisting the concerned organs. So it has also the three hands you can say. First is the lymph, second is the lymph vessel, and third one is the lymph node. So lymph we have just discussed. So system is what? It is an elaborate network of vessels which collects the interstitial fluid, that is the tissue fluid, along with some protein molecules that drains it back into the major vein, that is subclavian vein. It is just like the other vein, connecting and running parallel to the main vein. So these lymphatic vessels are present in all the tissues, but two areas are in exception. First is the central nervous system and second one is the cornea relating to eye. Now, why we called and what do you know about the formation of lymph? Question arises, how lymph and where lymph is formed. So, it is just about the circulatory system. What happens actually? In circulatory system, the purified blood from left ventricle it is firstly collected by the aorta, the main vein, then it is distributed to the arteries, then arterioles, capillaries. So capillaries, it is the single layered cell made up of a squamous epithelial tissue, and the cross section area of the capillaries is very less, very small. So blood coming under very high pressure. So blood when reaching to the capillaries certainly exerting more pressure on the capillary tube, and out of that the blood oozes out by rupturing of the wall of the capillaries. So due to rupturing of the wall of capillaries, the fluid comes out along with many water soluble substances, and that comes into the spaces between the cells of tissue. So very small of proteins comes out from the capillaries with the plasma, whereas leaving the larger protein particles and most of the formed elements in the blood vessels itself. So actually what happens when the blood or the material or the liquid oozes out, comes out from the rupturing of the capillaries, it started moving around the tissue, and this fluid is known as interstitial fluid or tissue fluid or extracellular fluid, that is ECF. So what happens when this fluid enters the lymph vessel? The same fluid, that is extracellular fluid, now becomes lymph. So when we say lymph is what? It is the extracellular fluid when entering to the lymph vessel. Now we are going to discuss about the main content of the lymph, that is function of lymph, what it does in our body. So it has a great role regarding every aspect. First is what? It acts as an important carrier of the nutrients, hormones, etc. Second one, absorption of fat also occurs through lymph in the lacteals present in the intestinal villi. The third one also helps in the renewal of ECF, extracellular fluid. The next one is maturation of lymphocytes, that is B cell and T cells, occurs with the help of lymph nodes, releasing them into lymph. The next one that helps in keeping the tissues cells moist, because for all biochemical activities that is happening in our body, this biochemical activities or reactions needs the tissues to be moistened. So the lymph does this function and makes the system or cells or tissues moist. So the lymph first reaches the lymph nodes like thymus, tonsil, spleen, that is present in our body. And the third part of the lymphatic system, lymph nodes, it is very necessary for making the system or blood immune. How? Node is what? It is just the aggregation of the glandular tissue. And what happens actually when blood passes through this area, it immediately, because it is having the lymphocytic cell, so immediately the lymphocytic cell of the lymph nodes, it recognizes the nature and number of the microbes or antigen present in the blood. So it immediately makes the antibodies, and this how it makes the blood free from any type of infection. So the lymph, we have seen, it does a lot of important functions to protect our body. Now, the basic difference between blood and lymph. So in blood, first of all, it is red in color due to presence of the respiratory pigment hemoglobin, whereas in lymph it is colorless because RBC is absent here. The next in blood, it is consisting the plasma, the RBC, WBC and platelets, whereas in lymph it don't have the RBC and platelets, rest it has. The very striking, you can say, in blood is what? The basic difference. Glucose concentration is very low, whereas in lymph the concentration of glucose is much higher than blood. In blood, clotting of blood is very fast, whereas clotting of lymph is very slow. In blood, it transports materials from one organ, one part of the body to the next. Whereas in lymph, it transports materials from tissue cells into blood. In blood, flow of blood is very fast, whereas in lymph, it is very slow. And in blood, plasma has more protein, calcium and phosphorus, whereas the plasma has less protein, calcium and phosphorus in case of lymph. So we have seen the lot of functions both fluid does, and moreover one thing is very special here. In case of blood, it moves away from the heart and towards the heart. But lymph, it is always unidirectional, one directional flow, and that is from tissues to subclavian, then to heart. Subclavian, that is the vein, it is just like the vein and runs parallelly along with the vein. So the flow of direction is from tissues to heart via subclavian vein. And next, the topic we are coming on, the mechanism of blood clotting. So already we have discussed in the previous class regarding the blood group, Rh factor. So now we will see how the blood clots. Because when we see if there is any injury or cut, blood oozes out. Means when blood, we say it is all the components present in the blood gets exposure. So when blood is exposed, its platelets present there, it immediately releases an enzyme, that is thrombokinase. And what happens actually in our blood, there is an anticoagulant present, that is heparin. It is never allowing the blood to clot while is remaining inside the blood vessels. So now we will discuss what are the steps to clot. So when an injury causes, there is stimulation of platelets in the blood to release certain platelet factors. What they do? They activates the mechanism of coagulation. So thromboplastin, a lipoprotein, helps in clot formation. So this clotting takes place in some steps. The first one is what? That is thromboplastin. It helps in formation of an enzyme prothrombinase, which inactivates heparin, and that converts the inactive plasma protein, that is prothrombin, into its active form as thrombin. The next step, what happens? This thrombin acts as a proteolytic enzyme to convert the fibrinogen molecule that is already produced from the liver in the presence of vitamin K to form insoluble fibrin content. So these all things happens in the presence of calcium ion. So this reaction required thrombokinase, an enzyme complex, just I have discussed, which is formed by a series of linked enzymatic reactions, which involves a number of various factors that is present in the plasma in their inactive state. So both the changes that just I have told requires the presence of calcium ion. So finally what happens? This fibrin that is converted from the fibrinogen. So this fibrin is insoluble in nature, and when it is formed, it is just making a network-like structure over the injury or the wound, and just it looks like the mosquito net. So what happens during clotting? When this fibrin network is spreaded over the wound, platelets gets entangled in the spaces, and this is the clot. So above all, now we are coming down on the very interesting and basic topic, that is the human circulatory system. So already we have discussed it has 3 parts. It is distributed in 3 parts: blood, blood vessels, and the last one, heart. So blood, every content we have discussed clearly. Now we are going to discuss about the blood vessels. So blood vessels is what? It is already divided in 3 groups. And 3 groups is what? That is artery, vein, and capillaries. So arteries is what? Usually artery carry oxygenated blood or the pure blood, whereas the vein deoxygenated. But one exception in our heart regarding pulmonary artery, it is carrying the deoxygenated or impure blood to the lungs for getting oxygenated, whereas the pulmonary vein that carries oxygenated blood coming from the lungs. So arteries, it has to pump out the blood received from the left ventricle. So certainly the wall of artery has to be thick because it has to exert pressure, whereas the vein is the receiving end. It receives blood, the impure blood from the whole part of the body through superior or inferior vena cava first collected by the venules, then come to the superior and inferior vena cava, ultimately joining or taking the all impure blood collected through superior and inferior vena cava, joining to the main vein, that is known as vena cava, and ultimately it is pouring the impure blood to the right auricle. So it don't has to exert more. The wall of vein is thin in structure. So the arteries, these blood vessels carry blood from the heart to different body parts. All arteries carry pure or oxygenated blood, with the exception of pulmonary artery that carries the impure or deoxygenated blood from heart to lungs for purification. Naturally, the walls of arteries are thick and non-collapsible because the pressure inside is very high. The other feature is what? Valves are absent in artery. There is no valves present here. And arteries are divided into 5 branches known as arterioles, which further get divided into very thin walled capillaries. So the last distribution of arteries, capillaries, which takes blood to the very, very interior part of our body. Now, the veins are another type of blood vessels that bring blood from different parts of the body to the heart. So, certainly carry the impure blood towards heart. All veins are meant to carry impure blood. Exception is pulmonary vein. Certainly, it is the receiving end. So, when it receives the blood, no need of wall to be thickened. So, its wall is very thin in nature. So, it's very striking and important point or questions for the exam, the difference between arteries and vein. Now, we are going to discuss some special feature regarding the circulatory system in human being. So, first of all, what is circulatory system? Circulatory system in human is also known as blood vascular system. It consists of a muscular, chambered heart, and we all know we have the 4 chambered. From the evolutionary point of view, we are fully evolved, developed organism. So we have complete 4 chamber heart. Now the network of closed branching blood vessels and the fluid that is circulated, it is the blood only. So first we will like to see its position, where it is present and how it is called the important organ of our body. So first of all, from evolutionary point of view, if we see, it is mesodermally derived organ that is situated in thoracic cavity between the 2 lungs. It appears to be slightly tilted towards the left side. So, it's the upper part is called the base, that you might have seen in the diagrammatic view, that it is something small, less wide you can say. So, the upper part is known as base the lower part slightly more widened. It is known as apex. Now, its protection, or you can say its appearance, and how it is getting protection. So, heart is protected by a double walled membranous sac or bag like structure known as pericardium, and which encloses a fluid. A fluid is present between this pericardium layer. So, why this fluid is present? This fluid is only present to keep the surface moist and to protect it from shock and any mechanical injuries, and allows its free movement. So, already we have discussed in case of lungs pleural membrane having the serous fluid, and it protects from the friction or shock. So, just like that, here also this pericardium covering having the pericardial fluid, and that does this protective functions.